2 years ago, I tried watching content in Vietnamese after months of studying, and I understood literally nothing, right? But today, I can watch pretty much whatever I want and understand almost everything and learn from it, right? So I want you to get to the position that I'm at now, where you can just turn anything you want on, watch it, not only enjoy it, but be genuinely learning from it as comprehensible input. All right, so I'm going to be giving you in this video 3 techniques that are going to actually practically help you, things that you can actually do to start understanding your input. And I'm also going to go over like a really important mindset shift to have in order to understand why, you're really doing this input in the first place. So the first technique is something that I like to call meaning transfer. How meaning transfer works is you're prioritizing understanding the meaning of the content before you try to understand the language. One way of doing the meaning transfer technique is by using English subtitles. So what you're going to want to do is find whatever piece of content that you're watching and find the smallest possible unit of that content. So let's just say you're watching a season of a show and that season has 12 episodes. You're going to want to do this technique with one episode, not the whole season. So you're going to want to find one episode of the show and you can use English subtitles to watch that show through. After that, you got a couple of options. You're going to want to reconsume that content, but without subtitles. You can do this just by rewatching it. I personally have never done this because I don't like rewatching the same content. I find that boring. So alternatively, you can do this with just listening while you're doing something else in the background, right? The key caveat for this is actually being sure that you're paying attention, right? You can't just have this input going on and be ignoring it. However, there's a lot of people that do not like using English subtitles at all, right? And I was one of those people. I had never watched Vietnamese with English subtitles. Instead, the way that I personally applied this technique was by doing one pass through in the show with target language subtitles, but looking up all the unknown words. Now, this, in my opinion, is less effective in terms of time efficiency than the method I just explained with English subs, because when you're looking up all the unknown words, you might think that in theory that sounds better, but in reality, you actually retain very little from those lookups because you're doing so many lookups, right, that you're just going to forget almost all of them, right? But this is what I did. So what I would do is I would watch one episode of the show, look up every unknown word, and then after that, maybe at work while doing house chores or something like that, I would listen to that show over again and just kind of imagine what's going on in the scenes. And so the way that this works is because you already know what's happening in the show and you already know like the meaning of what the characters are saying, you don't have to understand the actual language in order to follow the plot and understand what's going on. And this is truly how acquisition occurs, when you're understanding meaning, not necessarily when you're being able to translate and define words, right? And so this is highly, highly effective. And doing this will not only naturally grow your vocabulary subconsciously, but it will also improve your ability to listen to new words. So this is a very, very powerful technique. Again, I want to stress this. The main thing that you're doing here is you're focusing on understanding the meaning. So let's just say you have a show that you've watched dozens of times in English. For me, that would be SpongeBob. I have watched so much SpongeBob that I could probably just turn on any episode from seasons 1 through 3 and be able to recount every little detail that happens, every little thing one character tells another character, right? If you have content that you're that familiar with, then using that content would actually be highly valuable because you don't even have to preload with English. You can just go directly into listening with your target language. And because you already understand the meaning, even if you don't understand the words, it's going to be comprehensible. So think of ways you can put yourself in a situation where the input that you're getting, you understand the meaning, but not necessarily the words. That's basically the core fundamental of this meaning transfer technique. The second technique that I have is called laddering. And I call it laddering because you're gradually, slowly working your way up to building your vocabulary, right? And the way you're going to do this is with Anki, with spaced repetition. You're basically going to find unknown words in whatever content that you're listening to. You're going to add it to a spaced repetition system, and you're just going to slowly memorize those words over time, right? I have a whole nother video breaking down exactly how I recommend doing this in super like minute detail, even down to like how to use the software and everything like that. That's going to be in the description. But the core way to think about it is this. If you memorize 10 words a day in a spaced repetition system, then the percent of comprehensibility of the content that you're watching, no matter what you're watching, is going to increase every single day by a certain percentage, right? So if your current comprehensibility is at 31%, after a couple days of learning 10 words a day, it might jump up to 32, for example, right? And by doing that, you are just blatantly increasing how much you're able to understand. The reason why I didn't mention this first is because this takes time. I'm talking like years, right? The meaning transfer technique, you can do that in a matter of 20 minutes just by watching the episode with English subs and then re-listening, and now you're getting perfect comprehensible input, right? So I actually recommend doing both of these techniques. You want to be doing the laddering technique in order to just brute force over time, increase the words that you can understand. But then you also want to be using the meaning transfer. That way, on a day to day basis, you're able to consistently get high quality comprehensible input. The final technique that I want to talk to you about is called domain focus. And basically, what you're doing here is you're not jumping around from certain types of content in the beginning. Once you get to a more advanced or intermediate stage, then you could basically just turn on whatever you want and you will automatically understand like maybe 95% of it, right? But in the beginning stages, you want to focus on a very specific type of content because when you do that, certain keywords tend to repeat themselves. So let's just say you're into true crime, right? You're going to learn the word for criminal, witness, case. Those words you're going to learn really, really fast, and those are going to be recurring. I'm going to give you an example. Let's just stick with the true crime thing. If you know the word murder because you've heard it so many times from watching true crime, and you know the word suspect, right? Then let's just say there's a picture of a chef, and the sentence is, the chef is a suspect for the murder. You would understand that sentence. And because there's a picture of a chef, you would start to acquire the word for chef, right? Whereas if you're, let's just say, bouncing around from different types of domains and different types of content, and you're watching true crime for the first time and you're a beginner, you're unlikely to know the word for murder or suspect. And so you wouldn't have been able to acquire the word chef because there wouldn't have been one unknown word in that sentence. There would have been many unknown elements in that sentence, and you might have gotten confused, right? So the more that you're able to get that natural repetition, the less you have to worry about creating it yourself through SRS and things like that. And so it's highly beneficial to you to stick to one domain until you have super high comprehensibility in that domain before spreading out to other domains. And so for me, the first domain that I was really able to get a handle of was self-improvement. So I ended up learning the word for like discipline, improve, focus, develop. I learned those words really early on, and they became super instrumental to me understanding that domain. And now, while those words might not be important for a beginner to know, they're important for me to know because I like consuming self improvement content. And so you kind of want to tailor your input to what your interests are outside of that language. And so if I never really had that period of time where I focused on consuming self improvement content and I was just bouncing around through a bunch of different domains, it would have taken me substantially longer to learn those self improvement specific words, which would have meant that I was getting less comprehensible input overall. You've probably heard the advice not to learn multiple languages at the same time because then it becomes tricky to balance the vocabularies and the repetitions of both. That's kind of similar on a micro scale with domains. So you want to try to, the more domains you're trying to juggle at once, the harder it is for you to really get a grasp of one. So that's something you should really keep in mind. And the final thing that I wanted to talk about in this video was a mindset shift, right? You might feel frustrated that you're watching content but not understanding everything. And this isn't really something that should frustrate you, even if you're understanding practically zero, right? Because the more that you listen, the more that you get good at the actual skill of listening itself. So even if you're listening but understanding nothing, your brain is still learning how to process the sounds, the types of expressions that people use. A lot of stuff goes on under the hood that you're not consciously aware of. It's not the same feeling that you get when you look up the definition of a word and you remember it the next day. This stuff happens really slowly and really gradually, and you often don't feel it in the moment. But you just need to trust that the more you listen, the better you're getting at listening, the more that skill is going to serve you in the future. Same thing with reading. You've probably noticed that when you started learning your new language, just being able to read simple words, even if it's written with an alphabet, has been very difficult. And over time, the more familiar you get with the script, the easier that it actually is to read that script for long stretches, like, whole paragraphs and stuff, right? And the quicker your reading speed is, the more input you get, so on and so forth, right? So a lot of language is based on skills. And so even if you're not learning words and growing your vocabulary, you're still expanding skills, which is super important. And again, I have a whole video breaking down all the skills related to language learning. That's also going to be in the description as well. All right, so the first and biggest mistake that people make in regards to immersion is their comprehensible to incomprehensible ratio is off, okay? So what you're going to want to do is take the amount of input that you're getting and max it out towards comprehensible input. As much as you possibly can, make that input comprehensible. What does comprehensible mean? I'm looking at around 80 to 99% of whatever you're watching, you're able to understand. And you might ask me, what do you mean by 80 to 99%? Do you mean like 89 to 99% of the words, the meaning? To that, I tell you, it doesn't matter, okay? However you want to measure that 88 or 80 to 98% or whatever metric, that's how you can measure it, okay? However you want to measure it. So if you're using a tool like Migaku or something that like, or Link that calculates your known words, that works as well. But if you just want to like play the content and just go based off the vibe and say, okay, I'd say I understand about 90% of this, then that's also good too, okay? So that's what we consider comprehensible. That's the golden zone, is 80 to 99% comprehensibility, okay? If you are at a high intermediate level in the language or above, this is super easy because pretty much everything you listen to is going to fall within this zone, right? But the issue and where the mistakes come in is if you're at a level where native content, so like a regular show in the language, let's just say, for example, you're studying Japanese. If you're like a beginner or even a low intermediate, you can't just throw on the anime that you want to watch and just watch it at a high comprehensibility level, right? You're probably only going to understand, like, if you're really a beginner, maybe 20%, right? If you're like a low intermediate, maybe 60%, right? And that's not ideal for comprehensibility. You're not going to be acquiring as much language as you optimally could, right? And so for that, you'd want to take beginner level content or intermediate level rated content or whatever you want to get, right? And you're going to want to watch that, a content that's actually your level. It might be like some kind of intermediate level podcast that you found on Spotify or something like that. Whatever that may be, you want to use that. The thing is, though, you don't want to push yourself too much. You don't want to like ignore this stuff, right? You want to be getting comprehensible input, but you want to do basically as much as you can handle. So if you have like 3 hours a day to study, but after 20 minutes of the comprehensible Japanese podcast, you're bored out of your mind, then stop. Nobody's forcing you to do too much, right? Like, just do whatever you can handle. But what I'm saying is just don't ignore it. Like, you're leaving potential benefits on the table if you completely ignore it. You might as well max out the benefits by doing as much as you can tolerate every day and then switching, right? And then the inverse is also extremely important and arguably even more important than this, because you can, like, if you're a complete beginner, just throw on some really difficult anime in Japanese and watch it and just brute force your way to understanding it. You can do that, right? I'll make the argument that the opposite is not true. You can't beginner level content your way into fluency, right? You can't. You have to be ramping up the difficulty over time. And I think that it's a very good idea to always be having some percentage of your content be native level content, because for multiple reasons. Number one, you don't want to be shocked when you hear full speed Japanese. Let's keep using Japanese, right? Why not? Why not? You don't want to be shocked when you hear full speed Japanese. You want it to still be normal. You want to still be regularly getting that level of speed and that level of complexity, right? And you don't want to be shocked. You want to be ready for it. And oftentimes, one of the main reasons why you're learning the language in the first place is to watch and view that kind of content. And so you want to actually be using the language. You don't want to be perpetually learning it. You want to use it, because the fastest way to get better at something is to actually do the thing that you want to ultimately do, right? Like, if you want to be a YouTuber, imagine if I just recorded practice videos all day and I never uploaded them, right? Imagine if you want to be able to read really difficult texts and you keep reading all of these like little baby novels instead of jumping right into the great philosophers that you want to actually read, right? So it's really good for both motivation, your deliberate practice, mindset, everything, like all the above reasons, to be consistently immersing in native content as you're still watching the beginner content. So with that being said, we're going to dumb this down to 2 rules, okay? Rule number 1, at least 10% of your immersion should be native level content made for natives, by natives, for natives, at least 10%, right? Minimum. And then additionally, you should max out the amount of comprehensible input content that you can handle. So for some people, they're going to take this advice and they're going to, if they have, let's just say 2 hours in their day to spend studying Japanese, they're going to spend an hour and a half watching comprehensible content, whatever that looks like for them, whether that's an intermediate podcast or like a really beginner level short story. And then the rest of their time, they're going to, like the last 30 minutes, they're going to throw on an anime episode, right? And then for some people, they're going to basically spend the entire time, like an hour and 45 minutes watching the anime that is like really advanced level, right? And then 15 minutes just watching comprehensible content. And that's totally fine, right? Like, as long as you're operating within those two frameworks that I set, you're going to make really good progress and you're on the right track. All right. So that's mistake number one, is having the wrong comprehensible to incomprehensible ratio. Next thing, is a huge mistake that I've personally made so many times, and I regret this, is saving content for later. Okay. This sounds weird. Don't do it. All right. I've done this on so many different levels. Like, there's some content that I've saved for like forever because I have this mentality of I'll save it for when I understand more. Like, I really care about watching this, and when I watch it, I want to be able to understand it. So I'm just gonna save it. And you end up hoarding this content that you actually genuinely care about. Now, keep this in mind. Content that you really genuinely care about is not that common, right? Especially like maybe if you're learning a language with an abundance of content like English, Japanese, something like that, right? But for a lot of us, content that you genuinely care about comes kind of rarely. So when you find it, you should really just take that opportunity. Additionally, your interest kind of ebbs and flows. You're not always going to be interested in something. So when your interest is at its peak, you should really pounce on that, because maybe a month from now, you're not going to find that content too interesting and you're not even going to want to watch it, right? So you should be taking an opportunity to really pounce on your interests. Another big mistake that I make all the time is I'll save this content for when I can focus more. Like, if I'm at work and I have like an hour to be doing like some kind of thing that I can be doing passive listening in, and I'll be like, oh, this 1 hour podcast looks really, really good. I really want to watch this, but I'm not going to watch it right now because I want to like put all my focus into it. So I'll watch it later. And then guess what I don't end up doing later? Watching that podcast, right? So whenever, this is the same principle, whenever you want to watch something, don't allow yourself to give any excuses of, oh, I'll watch it later. Watch it in that moment. Like, even if you want to save your focus for later, because if it's that good, right, and your comprehensibility is just not there, if it's really that good, you're going to watch it again, right? You're going to, when you can actually pay attention, and you're going to be getting more out of it. And even not, right? Like, let's just say you watch it and you don't understand it that well, right? Then maybe like 3 months from now, you're basically going to forget everything that was in there. And when you watch it again, you basically get to watch it with fresh eyes. So you get to basically double dip, and you get to immerse twice in it. So there's really no excuse. Always consume the content immediately. Don't just simply like save it for later and end up hoarding it. I would say the rule is only have one piece of content that you're saving, right? You can do the one. You get one piece of content. Like, if you really need that as motivation for some reason to get fluent, to watch it, all right, you have this one show that like is your save for fluency show, okay? You get one pass only. Other than that, don't save content, just consume all the content immediately, okay? The final mistake that I'm going to go over in this video, this one is super important. So it's too many lookups, all right? Looking up words too much. So this is pretty self-explanatory. The more words that you look up in a short period of time, the less that you actually end up retaining from those lookups, right? The less lookups that you do, the more that you end up retaining from the lookups. So I've often gone through like phases where if I have like a 20-minute episode and I look up 30 words, I will walk away from that literally with nothing. I will literally remember 0 of the words that I looked up. Whereas if I watch a 30-minute episode and I look up 2 words that really stood out to me that I really wanted to look up, and I actually remember both of them, right? That's not uncommon to happen to me, where if the word really stands out and I look it up and I remember it, I've now walked away from this 30-minute episode with 2 words as opposed to 0, right? And so here are a couple of frameworks that you can use in order to determine whether or not you should look up a word. So one thing that I've done is only look up a word when I hear it twice. If they just say it once, I don't look it up. The second time I hear that same word, that's when I look it up. And this is because the second time you hear it, you're more likely to remember it because you've heard it in multiple contexts and you've heard it multiple times. And if it's used multiple times in one show, then that means it's important to that show, which means that they're going to use that word more often. So you're getting more benefit out of looking it up. Whereas if they only literally say the word once and you look it up, then there's not as much benefit because there's not going to be as much natural repetition of that word, right? So that's a really good one, a rule that you can apply for yourself. Another rule that you can apply to yourself is only once every couple minutes. So cap it by time, right? So that's kind of like obvious, self-explanatory. And the last technique for preventing too many lookups is only look up the word if it sounds familiar. Like if you get that feeling of like, I've heard that one before, then you look it up. Typically the way I do it with immersion is, especially if I'm doing like extensive immersion where I'm not like having dedicated lookup time, I'm just kind of out and about with a podcast on, I will only look up words if I hear it multiple times, or if the word sounds very familiar. Those are the two rules that I simultaneously impose on myself. And because of applying those rules, I actually have a really high retention rate for my random lookups that I do, right? And so, because when you keep them really like when you use them sparingly, you can even like repeat in your head the context that you heard it like hours later after watching that podcast. You can think, okay, what are some words that I looked up today? Oh, there was this one, that one. And by remembering them, you're like, applying spaced repetition to yourself, right? And so you can kind of like keep these words in your head and remember them without using Anki, right? So yeah, those are the three mistakes that people most often make. Let me know if you've made any mistakes, and let me know if you have any mistakes to add to this. I could go on for forever, but I kind of wanted to keep it brief at 3. Thank you for listening. The best possible way to do passive listening is to put yourself in a situation where you're understanding the meaning, but not necessarily the words of what you're listening to. Let me explain. So with passive listening, you're not putting 100% of your focus. Maybe you're doing the dishes, you're hitting a workout, whatever it may be, right? You're not putting all your attention in. And so with this in mind, you have to understand that it's super essential to be able to follow along with what's going on. Because if you're listening to something that you've never heard before and you zone out for like a minute because you're doing something particularly that requires more attention, and then you zone back in, now you're completely lost. You have no idea what was said. You have to pull out your phone, rewind, whatever it may be. And it adds friction to this whole process, okay? So with passive listening, you want it to be as frictionless as possible. And that's really it. We've basically covered the 2 main principles of passive listening. It should be frictionless, therefore easy to do and not require too much effort. And it should also prioritize understanding the meaning of the language over understanding the individual words. So on a practical level, what this looks like is, let's just say you watch a show and you watch like a 20-minute episode of the show. And you look up all the unknown words or a lot of the unknown words or whatever it may be. You look up words. What you would then do is listen to that same episode passively later. You wouldn't want to listen to the next episode passively because now you're kind of lost in the plot. You don't know what's actually happening. So if you zone out, you can't instantly know what's happening when you come back in. And on top of that, there's more words in that next episode that you haven't seen yet and that you won't know. And it will decrease your comprehensibility of that listening, right? If you listen to the same thing as you looked up and watched before, now you're able to zone back in. You know exactly what's going on in the show. And on top of that, you've already looked up a lot of the unknown words. So you're getting that reinforcement instead of just listening to, what could be potentially gibberish to you, right? And so you're reinforcing that vocabulary that you listened to earlier. So this is a super, super important technique. The only potential downside to this is that some people might find it boring to re-listen to things that they've already watched, but I find that most of the people who say that haven't actually tried this, because if you just try, like me, I never rewatch shows. It's incredibly rare for me to rewatch a show unless I have like a very specific reason to do so. Like I want to watch it with somebody or something like that, right? But 99% of cases, I never will rewatch a show. But in terms of re-listening, I find that you're more entertained by it because your mind is already, and your body may be already occupied by something else. And so your standard for entertainment is a lot lower than if you were just sitting down giving it 100% attention, right? And so if you haven't tried re-listening to content, I would highly recommend trying that out, right? It's super, super helpful for me. I definitely was able to feel a substantial boost in how fast I was able to grow my vocabulary after I started applying this technique, right? Another way that this can be applied, instead of just looking up a lot of words during your initial watch through, you can simply just watch it with English subtitles, whatever it may be. And I know that this is potentially controversial advice, but honestly, the reason why a lot of people say like watching with English subs doesn't work is because a lot of the people who are proponents of watching with English subs, they don't take them off, right? They just keep them on. And if you're perpetually watching with English subtitles, then yeah, you're going to make substantially less progress, if any at all, right? But if you watch with English subtitles once, right, in that moment, you're getting a decent amount out of that because the subtitles are boosting your comprehensibility overall, right? And I actually recently had experiences with this. I've been studying Japanese for the past month, and I went to go see the Chainsaw Man movie and the Demon Slayer movie. And when I was watching those movies, I was watching it with English subs with the Japanese language. And there were times where I could literally like feel myself acquiring language in real time because I would read the English subs and I would know every word that they said in Japanese except for one. And I would just check the sub in English to know what that one missing word was. And I was like picking up words like that just from that experience. So especially at the beginner level, like if you're advanced, then you don't have to do this, right? You can just actually just listen to the whole thing without even using subtitles, and your passive listening is just easy. You don't even have to do the re-listening techniques and stuff like that. The lower level you are, the more that this applies. And so you're getting benefits just from watching with English subtitles, but then the real benefits come in during your passive time, right? Where you take off the subtitles and you just listen to it. Now, any words that you started to acquire with those subtitles, that was kind of like an instant lookup in a way where you're just hearing it and then you're looking it up in that moment with the subtitles. Those words, as you listen to them, really, really do get baked in, and you really start to acquire them a lot more naturally in that way. So I hope this video helped you. It was a nice and quick one, but that's a really good way to supercharge your passive listening and actually get a lot out of it. Because I know a lot of people, they just kind of spend a lot of time listening to gibberish, so they actually don't get much out of their passive listening. And it's a shame because you can spend so much time passive listening. And like for me, for example, sometimes I'll spend 3 hours at work that I can spend passive listening. And if you use that time really effectively, and if you're able to pay like a decent amount of quality attention during that time, it can make a huge difference. All right. So really think of ways that you personally can start incorporating more passive listening and also incorporate the techniques that I just taught you in this video. Thank you for listening. So something super important to keep in mind when you're getting immersion is that you want constrained variety. And here's what I mean by that. So with constraint, you don't just want to watch literally everything, right? You want to narrow it down by domain. So you want to focus on one particular genre of the language for a certain amount of time. So for example, you don't want to go from self-improvement content to makeup content to cooking content to music content, right? You're going to overload yourself and you're not going to get enough repetition of key vocabulary words. What you'd rather do instead is focus on key domains one at a time. So spend like a month watching videos about music and then a month watching videos about self-improvement, because what you're going to do is you're going to experience a lot of repetition, right? For example, with music, the word for like fretboard or the word for like a note, like a musical note, you're going to get that so many times, and it's going to be much easier for your brain to really lock that word in. Whereas if you're just bouncing around a lot, you're not going to be able to have that opportunity. Okay, so you want to restrict by domain, and then additionally, you want to restrict by the accent of the language, right? Like this is obviously depends on what kind of language that you're learning, but if you're learning, let's just say like Vietnamese, which I'm learning, there is this thing where like the northern accent is substantially different from the southern accent. English is the same way. American English, which I'm speaking right now, is substantially different from Australian English. Like the vowels and everything are all different. It's going to be very difficult for a learner to really like internalize one way of speech when they're constantly bouncing back and forth between these very drastically different accents. Just like how it's better to focus on one domain at a time, it's better to focus on one accent at a time and really get proficient with hearing and listening to that kind of accent. And you don't have to go overboard with this, right? Like I would say 80-20 it, right? Like 80% of your immersion is one domain, one accent, and then 20% can kind of just be like whatever. It doesn't matter too much, right? With that being said, you still want variety, right? So I've noticed, like personally, whenever I'm listening to Vietnamese, I can get really good at understanding one person, right? Because even to the individual like person level, there's a ton of like things that will help you, right? Like for example, people tend to repeat the same types of words, the same types of filler words. They speak with like the same intonation, whereas like another person will use a completely different set of words to describe the same thing, and they have a different speech intonation, etc., etc. So you want to be listening to as many different types of speakers as possible. I've experienced where I really like this one podcast in Vietnamese. And so this one podcaster, I can understand him super well, even though he speaks on like very complex topics. But then when I listen to a different speaker on a similar topic, I understand substantially less because I'm just not used to their intonation, right? And like women speak in a very specific way a lot of the time. Young children oftentimes will like slur their speech and use like different types of words, and their pitch of voice makes them more difficult to understand. And then old men are like notoriously difficult to understand in a foreign language because of the way their voice is gruffy and lower, and they tend to slur a lot more. So basically what you want to do is a huge variety of speakers with a limited variety of domains and accents. The next tip I have is listening as soon as you wake up. And I mean like the instant you wake up. So I've had periods, like the periods in my immersion journey when I make the most progress are when I have my AirPods and my phone right on my desk next to my bed, and I wake up, and as soon as my alarm hits, the first thing I do is I put in an AirPod and I put on a pre-selected, this is key, pre-selected piece of content from the night before. So you don't want to wake up and start scrolling like a doom scroller, right? You don't want to do that. You don't want to wake up and like, be like thinking of what video to put on. No, no, no. You had the video predetermined the night before, so there's literally zero thoughts in your brain. You literally wake up, put on the video, boom, put it in, you're done. Now when you're getting ready, brushing your teeth, washing your face, putting on your clothes, you're getting immersion that entire time. Now, this is not just like because you're going to get an extra 20 minutes a day, even though that's a good reason. But the main thing here is that when you start your day in your target language, there's so many benefits for that. Number one, you build up a win, right? I've talked about this on the channel before. It's super important to generate momentum, right? And so when you get the ball rolling, when the first second of the day you're already immersing, you find it much easier to continue immersing throughout the day because the ball's already rolling, right? Like the progress has already started to be made. And at that point, you have to actively stop it, right? And so it's much easier to make a lot of progress that way. Number two, when you immerse, as soon as like the instant that you listen, your brain basically didn't turn on the English part of its brain yet, right? Like this is kind of bro science, but like I find that when I wake up and I immediately put in the Vietnamese, I start thinking in Vietnamese immediately, right? And throughout the day, the entire morning, I'm continually thinking in Vietnamese. Whereas when I start the day and I start brushing my teeth, putting on my clothes, things like that, I'm having English thoughts while doing that. And so my brain starts the day in English mode, basically. And so this just compound effect of getting points on like immersion points on the board and starting your day thinking in your target language, and those extra 20 minutes that you get of like doing having immersion during your morning routine all combined to make this a super crucial tip. If you have not tried this already, this is going to change the game for you. It changed the game for me, so I highly recommend that. Immersion tip number 3, this is super underrated, not enough people do this. It's go deep, like beyond language immersion, right? Like this is like beyond language at this point. When you think of immersion, right, you often like, especially like you and me, like people who are really into language learning, we think of just listening to words, but it's so much more than that. Like, really think about it. Like when a traditional language learner thinks of immersion, like, and they don't know what we're kind of doing here, what would they think of? They would think of going to the country, right? And when you go to the country, yeah, you get language, right? But more, I don't know about importantly, not more importantly for language learning, but like more deep than that, you get social connection where you're actually meeting people and interacting with these types of people who are a part of that culture. You eat the food, right? You listen to the music. There's just you adopt the same hobbies as those types of people. It's just so much deeper than language, and by implementing that into your routine, I think that that really helps. Like for example, listening to the music. Obviously, you're not going to get that much language benefit from listening to the music, right? But just by being like in that mode, like music really is influential on your brain, and just by being in that mode of listening to the same types of music as your the people of your target language listen to, you kind of are able to more empathize with them and to kind of put yourself in their position, right? Food is a huge one for me. Like when you think about like the five senses, right? Like smell and taste. You don't smell and taste language, right? But with food, you can like it. What I'm saying is like it feels stupid, right? But like when you actually try this stuff and you start intentionally like going out and eating like the food of the language that you speak, right? Like for me, eating Vietnamese food, and you start listening to Vietnamese music, it makes you better at the language. I don't know how to explain it. It just does. And so if you haven't tried it, you probably think I'm like BSing right now and I'm just saying this, but no. It like it really affects your brain, and it primes your brain to want to learn the language more. It makes your brain think it's more important because you're activating more senses and you're getting more experiences, right? Yeah, that's pretty much it for the tips. Just to recap really quick, constrain your immersion to 80% one domain, one accent. In addition to that, listen as soon as you wake up to start your day with that fire. On top of that, go deep. Whatever hobbies that you're currently doing, watch content about those hobbies in your target language to make that your domain. Even try to get into new hobbies that are kind of related to your target language. For example, Japanese, there's a super big rock climbing culture in Japan, super big. So maybe try bouldering, climbing for some reason. Try it. Just try it out, see if you like it. Food, eat the type of food that they eat in that country. Eat that country's cuisine. Socialize, make friends that speak that target language. All right. You do this, your immersion is going to be supercharged, your motivation through the roof, and you're going to make a lot more progress. All right, see ya. Trying too hard to understand my immersion is the biggest mistake I've ever made in my language learning career. Let me explain that. Often what happens is that when you're putting your brain's effort and energy into understanding what the person had just said, you end up missing the words that they're about to say next. And so it ends up perpetuating this really bad cycle of lower comprehension than you really should have, right? And so the way that I had solved this was you want to try to experience what it's like to understand language without putting in effort, because it sounds like people often say this like effortless understanding stuff and all that, but unless you really experience it for yourself, you're not going to really know what it should feel like. And this was the case for me for the longest time. Like I never really knew what it felt like to understand effortlessly. And so because I never knew what it felt like, I never knew how to really put myself in that state. And because like it's hard to know whether or not you're putting in effort into understanding unless you really know what it feels like. Okay. So You might be thinking right now, like, oh, I understand English effortlessly, and so I can just compare it to that. But really, you can't, because English is your native language. You need to kind of experience understanding a non-native language effortlessly in order to know how to like really do it, right? And so when I first kind of gained self-awareness into just how much effort that I was manually putting into understanding content, I was in Matt versus Japan school, and at the time he was recommending this technique he was calling Tetris immersion, right? And so basically, what I would do is I would play like some Vietnamese content in a separate tab, and I would open up a main tab that I would full screen, which would be Tetris, and I would just like grind Tetris and like improve my ability to play Tetris while listening to the immersion in the background. And what the idea behind this is that Tetris is very like resource intensive on your brain. You have to really focus in order to play well because the blocks are falling down. I'm gonna put some Tetris gameplay on the screen right now. The blocks are falling down really fast, and you have to order them in a very specific way. So you're really deeply thinking about like how you're playing Tetris. But at the same time, it's not so intensive like something like chess, right? To the point where like you can't even hear anything outside. You can still kind of process outside speech and information like that. And I had done this for like only about 5 minutes or so. And I started to notice that I was understanding without thinking at all, right? Because what I would do is I'd play Tetris and then I'd have the show going on in the background. And at first, I actually couldn't even tell whether or not I was understanding the show. And then after 5 minutes, I would do like a little recap in English to myself of like, okay, what happened in the show? Okay, this person said this. And then I realized that I actually was understanding it, right? Which is crazy. And then a moment that really had like clicked with me was I was doing this Tetris immersion while watching an entire like 45-minute Netflix show. And then at one point, I was just in such a flow state. Like I wasn't even having any thoughts in my brain at all. I was just so focused on the Tetris and I guess also focused on the immersion at the same time that a character had said a joke and I had laughed. Like I laughed out loud, actually. It was a pretty funny moment in the show. And I realized that really made it click that, like, oh, I really am effortlessly understanding this content because if I wasn't, then I wouldn't have got the joke, right? And so that was like a really pivotal moment in my immersion journey where I realized that like effortless understanding really is possible. You just kind of have to bring it out of yourself by teaching yourself how to do it. Another way that I experienced this besides Tetris was I'm going to call this the Death Note phenomenon, right? So I was having this like brief moment where I was just tired of learning Vietnamese. I was just it was just so effortful, right? That I was just exhausted and I wanted to do something else. And so I was like, let me just goof around in Japanese for a little bit for no reason. Yeah. And so what I did was I threw on this episode of Death Note, the first episode, and I just started watching it without subs just to see like how much I could understand because I had watched a lot of Japanese like anime with Japanese audio a lot in the past, but with English subtitles, right? And I'd never like watched Japanese shows without English subtitles. So I was just watching and characters were saying things that I was able to instantly understand. And the English translation wasn't popping up in my head, which was like crazy to me because at that point I had this horrible habit of every sentence in Vietnamese I would quickly translate to English in my head in order to understand it. And so when I was watching Death Note, they were saying things like "machigai nai," and I knew what that was instantly. It means like it's not a mistake or something like that, right? Like I understood that instantly, and there was no English translation in my head. I just understood "machigai nai" as "machigai nai." I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but if you've ever watched anime, you know what I'm talking about. And that moment where I realized that I could understand a word in a completely foreign language that I don't speak without knowing the English, like firmly knowing the English equivalent or even thinking of it, really like transformed the game for me. Other ways that you can get this effect are from taking a break from the language. I've noticed that when I take a break, like even just like a day off of like Vietnamese and I go study something else, when I come back to it the next day, I find that my brain is just more receptive to like it's less in like that hyper processing mode and more in like that effortless understanding mode. And there's other ways that people have been able to do this that I've seen online where some people will watch like even though they're at like an intermediate level, they'll go back in their language and they'll watch beginner level content. And then they'll kind of like watch that content with the intention of like practicing their effortless understanding because they're only using like in the super beginner content, they're only using like the top 100 most common words, right? And so you should know those like down pat at an intermediate level. And so it's super easy to effortlessly understand at that level. And then you can kind of transition that and gradually go from like effortlessly understanding beginner content to more advanced content, right? And when you effortlessly understand content, just to kind of make it clear, there's definitely still unknown words. It's not like you're like understanding it as if a native was like hearing it, right? But the the thing is that you when you're effortlessly understanding the words that you don't know, you can actually hear them. You hear the words that you don't know and you understand why you don't understand that sentence, right? It's not just sounding like one big blur to you, is what I'm trying to say. The way that I view effortless understanding is that you can unlock it. It's like a one-time unlock, right? Of course you can like get better at it, but in general, it's a one-time unlock, right? So you can often find like bilingual people are very good at this, people who are like natively bilingual, whereas people who are monolingual and they're studying a second language often tend to be really bad at this, like I was, right? And so to sort of reference Jujutsu Kaisen, immersion is like cooking, right? And being able to understand how to immerse effortlessly is like being able to taste your own food. You kind of internalize the mechanisms and you really understand how the whole entire system works. You might not believe me, you might think I'm sounding weird here, but once you experience the phenomena of understanding a second language effortlessly, then your brain is going to realize how important it is and how much better it feels to do that. And you're going to start naturally having inclinations towards that kind of comprehension, the effortless type of comprehension. The really like the hurdle that you have to go over is how can I experience this effortless comprehension for the first time so my brain kind of knows what it is? And how do I optimize my immersion to help my brain kind of get into that sort of state? So to take my Death Note story and make it like a more practical thing, maybe there's a language that you know, like that your family speaks or something like that, where there's a couple of words that you know like effortlessly, and kind of try to think of that, right? If you literally don't have any other language like that, then what I would do is find a language that you've never spoken before and find comprehensible input content, like pure comprehensible input, no words, nothing, where they're just like it's designed to take you from zero to like being able to understand a couple words. You can go for comprehensible Japanese as a website. I think it's actually called CI Japanese. There's an entire comprehensible Thai YouTube channel where you can just like watch like a couple 30-minute videos in Thai, and then you'll get to the point where they teach you like a couple very common words. And the entire purpose of these comprehensible input channels is to get you to effortlessly understand. They don't teach you words manually. You literally just acquire them. It's entirely acquisition based. And so I'd find a couple of acquisition based videos on a random language that you're kind of interested in. Do that just so you can know what it's like to like acquire vocabulary. Because if you try this in the language that you're currently studying, it might not work because your brain associates that language with manual comprehension already. So just find a way, is what I'm saying, to get to the point where you have acquired language that you can just effortlessly understand, and then you can apply that mindset and that idea to your current target language. Now that you've gotten to the point where you've experienced effortless understanding and your brain knows what it is, how can you optimize your study to allow your brain to fall into that mindset and to assist your brain into building that habit? What you're going to want to do is treat immersion as if it's a form of meditation. So if you don't know how meditation works, basically what you do is you have an object of meditation. For a lot of times it's your breath, right? And so what happens is you focus your mind on the object of meditation, and then your mind wanders. And then what you do is once you realize that you gain self-awareness that you have wandered, you return your attention to the focus of the meditation, right? So oftentimes it's breath. So you're breathing, you're focusing on your breath, and then your mind wanders. You start thinking about something that you did at work that day, and then you realize that your mind wandered. You bring it back to the breath, and that's one meditation rep, right? And so the way you can do this with immersion is that you start watching immersion, you watch the content you're watching, and then you realize that somebody said a grammar pattern that you started comprehending in your head. You gain self-awareness that you're currently comprehending, you stop your comprehending, and you return back to the content and just focus on it, right? That's kind of what you have to do. And eventually, like I did this for like weeks, and then eventually I got to the point where I didn't really manually comprehend anymore. I was just watching straight through and effortlessly understanding. So that's how you're going to kind of action step like what we just talked about here. All right, the video game mentality of language learning. This is going to completely change the game for you. I'm really excited for you to watch this video. So I'm going to use Dark Souls as an example, but you can kind of apply this to whatever game you want. If you're a Dark Souls fan, this is going to be your favorite video of all time, right? So when you start a language, it's like starting a Dark Souls game, okay? You have no idea how difficult it's really going to be, but you know that it's going to be pretty difficult, right? And another thing is you don't have any idea how long it's going to last. Like Dark Souls 2 was a long game. I had no idea what I was in for, right? And so kind of this idea of coming in, not knowing what you're going to expect, and then getting spanked, right? that's kind of like what happens to us as language learners. All right. And so there's really two main paths that people take when they're confronted with such a difficult game like this, right? The first path that people often take is watching a lot of guides, right? Like they're kind of just like casual gamers and they can't really handle what's up ahead. And so they think that if they just watch a ton of like really in-depth guides, eventually they're going to be able to beat the game, right? And so the way I think of it is that, ooh, just hit my mic. Are we good? All right. The way I think of it is that watching guides is kind of like studying grammar. Okay. The best people often don't watch guides, they just kind of pick things up as they go along and learn on their own. Those are kind of like the people who end up acquiring the most natural language, right? And oftentimes seasoned gamers have like a thing against watching guides, but they think it's like not fun. Just like how a lot of like seasoned language learners don't like watching grammar videos and they think it's not fun and they're not going to do it. So now when we think about a video game, what would be objectively the fastest and most efficient way to complete the game from start to finish? Would it be watching hundreds of guides and memorizing the exact swings and the exact moves that the player in the guide uses to beat the bosses? No, that would be highly inefficient. And if you just kept watching guides and trying to memorize what the guides are doing over and over again rather than playing the game, you would screw yourself over and you would take forever if you even ever were able to finish the game, right? That's traditional classroom style language learning for you, right? Whereas the guy who just plays the game, he just goes straight into it and just plays it, oftentimes will be better than the guy who watches the guides, right? He's a more seasoned player, he knows what he's doing more. But if that guy watched the guides, right? Just like very quickly, briefly watched the guides and picked up like an OP weapon that he wouldn't have found on his own, or picked up like a really powerful strategy that he wouldn't have found on his own, or would have taken him a long time to find on his own, that guy would most likely beat the game faster if he just spent like maybe like an hour total, like total elapsed time, just an hour learning and watching guides and picking up the most OP stuff early. He would beat the game faster than if he didn't do that. Maybe he would enjoy it less, right? And so that's a real concern, but he would objectively beat the game faster. And this is the case with grammar study, right? If you just make yourself aware of the grammar patterns, you're not memorizing anything, you're not watching over and over again. You just kind of look through literally one time for about an hour just to understand, okay, maybe there's an OP weapon here, blah, 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 blah. This is a really good build to have. Okay, got it. And then you spend the rest of your time playing the game, which is getting immersion and practicing output and all that stuff, then you're going to be so much better off and you're going to be able to beat it faster. But at the end of the day, just like with video games, you should prioritize enjoyment in language learning, just like a game. Like when you buy a game, are you buying it to beat it as fast as possible or to beat it in the most efficient way possible? Probably not. You're probably buying this game in order to enjoy it. So you need to adopt this mentality to your language learning, right? If you hate grammar study, then never do it. Go pure comprehensive input all the way. Just do that, okay? If you enjoy studying grammar, don't like avoid grammar study. If you enjoy it, don't avoid it in order to perpetuate this idea that, oh, only the true language learners don't study grammar. No, just like with a video game, you play whatever style you enjoy, and that's how you're going to, number one, end up beating the game in the first place because you're enjoying it. So you're eventually like, if you're enjoying it, you're guaranteed to get to the end if you're enjoying it and consistently playing. And number two, it's your journey, right? And so it's the actual enjoyment that you get out of it has that's where the value's at. That's what you paid for initially, right? That's where you're getting your money's worth, right? And with language learning, you're basically paying with your time, right? And so that's how you're really getting value from this whole thing is the enjoyment process. Now, I want to take a moment to specifically talk about speedrunning, okay? Speedrunning in both video games and language is the exact same thing, okay? Speedrunning is something that very few people actually do and actually want to do, but everybody watches and admires, right? Like how many times have you watched a speedrun of a game and you learn a lot from it, right? And there's sometimes even you'll learn things from the speedrun that have value and that you actually want to try. Like, oh, I didn't even know that you could kill this boss now. I want to try that. Or I didn't even know that you could do this combo like that. I want to, you know what I'm saying? But a lot of speedrunning in video games is stuff that you enjoy looking at because it looks nice, okay? Language learning is the same way. Would imagine buying a game and then before you even like play the game through and enjoy it and develop your own strategies and all that stuff, you just immediately watch the speedrunners and you try to do exactly what they do, okay? You might enjoy that if you're like really passionate about speedrunning and if you're into the science of it and you really like the community and all that stuff. Like that's me right there, right? Like I love like in terms of language learning anyways, I love like kind of speed running and seeing how far you can push this stuff in a short amount of time. At the same time, however, most people aren't like that. Most people aren't going to prioritize speedrun, but most people will find entertainment and at least get a lot, like some value from speedrunning, right? So when I make videos teaching people about like the most efficient ways that I found to do X, Y, and Z, that doesn't mean that you have to do it. It means that you're going to get a lot of value from watching my videos and you can apply some of the things, just like with the speedrunning example, but you don't have to become a speedrunner unless you enjoy that type of playstyle, right? And so that's a super important kind of framework to keep in mind. Finally, I want to talk about build variety. This is another reason why I use Dark Souls as an example, right? So when I play Dark Souls, what I do is I'll usually look up a video before I even like open the game, right? And I'll search like best build for Dark Souls, right? Or whatever the type of Souls-like game it is. And I'll go through. I never choose the most OP one. I swear, I'm not one of those guys. I swear. I never choose the most OP one. What I'll do is I'll keep looking through the videos and I'll find one that has like, maybe it's like ranked like 5 in the top 10 video. But the thing about this build is that it has like a weapon or like the main component of the build you can get within like the first hour of gameplay, right? That's really what I look for. I look for the best early starting weapon, right? And I never swap it out. Never. That's my playstyle. I hate like changing my build mid game. I like committing with one thing and sticking it through to the end, right? The reason for that is because when you choose a weapon that requires a lot of strength in the beginning, you get so much benefit from leveling up your strength stat that like any points you put into anything else is just a waste, right? So then at that point, you get to the point where you're really good with a strength weapon, but if you try to use any magic, you're screwed, right? And so I like optimizing for one specific build. And so language learning is just like that, right? When you watch, let's just say like history content and you keep going at first, you don't have like the stats required to wield the history content weapon, right? But eventually as you level up and you specifically choose your stats for the history domain of language, eventually you're going to get to the point where you're really good and your language learning character is hyper optimized for understanding history. Once you get to that point, beating the game is really easy. Just like if you have a really good build that's optimized for like one specific thing, like strength in Dark Souls, you can beat the game. And beating the game is just, I guess, conversational fluency, right? You can beat the game. And then most people, when they beat the game, they're not just satisfied there, right? Some people are. Some people just want to get to conversational fluency. And if that's you, great. You know, you can get there quickly. But a lot of other people, what they want to do is they want to get like true fluency. They want to master like all the different builds in order to be able to play with whatever playstyle they want whenever like they want, basically, right? And so the most effective way to do this from like a purely efficiency standpoint is to choose one build, like I do in Dark Souls, right? Choose one build that you can stick to early on that really interests you, that's really fun for you, that you enjoy playing with, right? And then take that all the way to the end, which is conversational fluency. So really master and get like fluent in that domain of language, and then do a new game plus run, which is where you basically start another run with like new stats, and then optimize for something else. Now you're doing like a magic build or like a self-improvement domain where you're watching self-improvement content, right? Take that to the end, and then next game you want to do like a dexterity build, and you want to do like medical, you want to watch medical shows in the language, right? And so you keep doing that. That's how you get to be really good and have this complete character. Whereas if you're the type of person to switch builds mid-game all the time, what's going to happen is that you're going to have like a lot. Let's just assume you can't change your stats once you upgrade them, right? So let's just say that you end up with like a lot of stats that are like mid-level. So your strength is mid, so you can't wield this really powerful strength weapon. Your dexterity is mid, so you can't do any damage with the 2-dagger weapon, right? So you end up being able to do a ton of stuff, but none of it you can do very well. So you end up, it ends up being very hard for you to beat the game. And you're constantly switching. So even when you switch, your ability to actually like play with that certain weapon is worse because you haven't been using that weapon for 10 hours throughout the game. You've only used it for 20 minutes. So you don't actually know how to perform all the combos and all the different hits do with that weapon, right? And then you're switching to another one later. So can you beat the game if you continuously switch builds? Yes. Will it be harder for you? Yes. Will it take you a lot longer? Yes. But this is the most beautiful thing, as I've said. We're optimizing for enjoyment. I know a lot of people who play Dark Souls like switching builds and experimenting, and they don't like necessarily doing New Game Plus. And so, as I said, as long as you're enjoying the process and you keep going and you're actually playing the game, you're not like, just watching videos all day. You're actually playing the game and you're getting better. You will get to the end, which is ultimately fluency. Whether you want to stick with one build, you want to do a variety, or you want to watch speedrunning and just speedrun the stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. It all depends on your intentions and how, like, what you're enjoying, right? And so I'm going to put all of this that I just said, like, kind of wrap it all in a nice bow and kind of give the most optimal framework based on, all of the analogies that I've been giving so far, right? So the first thing that you're going to want to do when you start learning a language is you're going to want to watch a video to choose what build you're going to want to use, right? This is the equivalent of, like, okay, learning Japanese, there's like the Tokyo standard accent and the Osaka accent. Then there's this thing called pitch accent, and the verbs are actually put at the end of a Japanese sentence. So getting all that basic stuff down is like super important from the beginning. So that's like your build, right? So you start with that. And then what you're going to want to do is every time you come across a boss that's difficult, you can try it a couple times, but then immediately you go watch a guide. That's basically like looking up grammar, basically. You don't obsess over this guide and try to memorize the boss's moves in the guide and like memorize how the guy counters the boss move. No. You just watch the guide and get his surface level instructions on how to beat the boss. And then you go play the game so you can actually beat the boss, right? So that's basically just looking up grammar, kind of setting a very small amount of time for it, and then actually encountering it in real life experiences, right? Additionally, you're going to want to watch speedrunners. So watch YouTubers who talk about like efficient language learning and really take a lot of their advice and apply it to your specific situation, but don't just like blindly copy exact routines unless you're really trying to test them and like learn how to speedrun. If you don't want to be a speedrunner, then just watch the speedrunners anyways and just take the little tidbits that they use and apply it to your own journey. And ultimately, you're going to want to stick with one weapon / domain, language domain or whatever the whole time. That way you can reach conversational fluency and then from there expand out into different domains. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I think this analogy is super cool, especially if you're a gamer, and it's super powerful to kind of change the way that you think about language learning. Thank you for listening. This video will change the way that you learn languages forever. All right, so let's get started immediately. So optimizing definitions. This is the most important part of this entire video. I'm putting it right at the beginning. Okay, so a core definition is basically the type of definition that encompasses every possible definition of the word. It's one unifying definition of that word. Okay, this typically does not exist in dictionaries or Google Translate or anything like that. But AI can actually create this for you, and it allows you to get a very deep and nuanced understanding of the word. So in order to get AI to generate these core definitions for you, you have to explain to it what a core definition is because it doesn't actually understand this term. So go ahead and actually explain to it what this is. Tell it a core definition is a definition that encompasses all possible meanings of the word into one unifying meaning, okay? Once it understands what a core definition is, then you want to tell it to save what a core definition is to its memory and to remember to always give you a core definition whenever you ask for a definition of a word, unless you state otherwise, okay? And how you know that it actually saved this to memory is by going to Profile, Settings, Personalizations, Memory, and then Manage. And then you'll see a list of all your ChatGPT's memories, and it should be under there, okay? This is super important because you don't want it to give you vague definitions or one-off definitions. You really want to be utilizing this core definition concept. And so now I'm going to explain to you why core definitions are so valuable and why this is going to be an absolute game changer for you, okay? So think of the word run in English, right? The word run can mean many different things. And I bet if you look in the dictionary, it has maybe even dozens of definitions, right? So obviously there's to actually physically like run by moving your body. There's running water, running a program, etc. So to run can mean to sprint, to flow, or to operate, right? Many different definitions for that word. And so imagine an English learner trying to learn the word run, right? The first time they hear it, it's probably going to be in the context of somebody like sprinting or something like that, right? And then the next time they hear it, it's going to be like running water. And they're going to get a little bit confused potentially, right? Unless they've had a ton of input under their belt, they're not really going to be able to grasp that nuance. And so what's going to happen is that they're going to have to memorize two different definitions, which is literally double the work, right? And so what you do with a conceptual definition or a core definition is you have ChatGPT explain to you the meaning of all of these things at once. So what you're actually doing is you're front loading the work for an easier payoff in the future, right? So to run, this is a ChatGPT generated definition, by the way, of this word, to move or operate in a continuous flow or stretch, right? And so let's just say this word was in your target language, and so you're able to understand the English explanation. So if you're able to internalize and understand this core definition, then you actually get all three of these in one fell swoop, right? Which is super, super powerful. There's this word in Vietnamese, chịu, which means like to bear something, like to take the burden of something, right? And then it could also mean to agree, right? And it's very common for tutors and for many people that are teaching Vietnamese to say that, oh, chịu actually has two definitions or many different definitions, right? But I was always having trouble with this and not really clicking it until I kind of thought, right? Like, if you're going to agree to something, then that means you're willing to bear that burden, right? And so the words are actually connected in some kind of weird way, right? And almost every word with multiple definitions can be like connected in a weird way that's going to help you understand all of them. So I think now that you kind of understand how core definitions work, you're able to kind of put the pieces together on how this can actually just completely change the game for you in language learning and help really drastically accelerate the pace at which you learn words. Next type of definition that we have is a dynamic monolingual definition. And basically what this means is you're generating a definition of a target language word in your target language. So instead of using an English definition, let's just say if you're learning Vietnamese like me, you're using a Vietnamese definition, right? I used to do this all the time with an actual dictionary. So what I would do is I would look up a Vietnamese word in the Vietnamese dictionary, and then I would look up the words that are in the dictionary that I didn't know, and I would just keep going down this rabbit hole. And sometimes it would literally take me like 20 minutes to look up one word because I would have to look up all the unknown words and the definitions and the words of the definitions and the definitions. And so this picture kind of represents what I was going through here, right? With just constant tunneling. And I would make flashcards for all of those words and go through that process multiple times. And so I ended up getting pretty good at just reading and understanding dictionary definitions in Vietnamese, which has exponential benefits because you learn how to understand explanations in your target language, and you learn how to understand more complicated literary vocabulary that will come up when you're doing reading later on. But overall, this process is made so much simpler by just asking ChatGPT to give you a monolingual definition, but you're being dynamic with it. So instead of just being forced to use the dictionary definition, you can tell it to give you a definition with no unknown words. So I have an example here. I asked ChatGPT to define the word parasitic, which is kind of like a complicated word. And I'm assuming the dictionary definition would be kind of complicated, but only written with the top 500 most common English words, right? So it says parasitic, living by taking from another living thing, not giving anything back, often hurting the other one while staying alive from it. Right. So literally it can define word, like the most complicated of words using the most simple of words to define it. Right. Which is super valuable. So if your main goal is to increase reading or just generally increase your vocabulary, doing this is like adding immersion on top of your immersion, right? So it's super, super powerful. I've done this before and I can highly recommend it. Of course, you know me, I only recommend reading and, intensively reading like this once you're comfortable with pronunciation. So take with that what you will, but this is honestly a super powerful strategy to like really level up your immersion. And again, since it's dynamic, it can be done at any level. And here is an absolute lifesaver, right? Ask it the most natural way to say something, right? Because oftentimes when you're using like Google Translate or when you're coming up with speech in your head, you're often taking English grammar structures or English even culture of wherever you're from, and you're kind of trying to rigidly apply it to your target language. And that often doesn't work. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you end up saying something that can be understood, but a person who speaks your target language would never say that, so you sound really unnatural, right? And so when you ask it the most natural way to say what you're thinking, you end up training really good habits and you end up remembering these things really well. I'll give you a really solid example that happened to me. I was walking to the gym and I was actually thinking in Vietnamese because I had been listening to podcasts all day, and I was thinking in Vietnamese, and then I tried having a thought, but I switched to English to make the thought, right? And the thought was, I need to go to the gym now or else I won't go at all, right? And then I kind of thought, like, why did I switch to English to make that thought when I was previously thinking in Vietnamese? And I realized that I didn't really know the most natural way to say or else, right? I was kind of a little bit stumped. I would be able to say something resembling that, but I wouldn't know a natural way. And so I asked ChatGPT, and immediately it gave me the structure, nếu không thì, and I had heard that structure literally hundreds, if not thousands of times in my immersion before. It just never clicked. I never made the assumption between the English structure and the Vietnamese structure. And since then, I never forgot, right? It stuck with me so powerful because it was just so real. It happened in that moment. It was something that I actually thought of and I needed to say in that moment, right? And so this is super powerful. So just by thinking in your target language and getting immersion, you're naturally going to have these situations where you're going to want to say something, and asking ChatGPT and using this most natural way to say X formula is super effective. All right. The only problem with this, right, comes here is oftentimes when you ask it the most natural way to say something, it'll respond with something really good. And then after that, it'll be like, oh, do you want to hear like the most hood slang way possible to say this that all the kids are saying on the streets, and then it will give you just actual nonsense, like actual gobbledygook. So don't listen to that, okay? Like when it asks you to, if you want that, just say no, okay? Trust, it's not going to work out. Another way you can use AI is to help you grind sentence patterns. This is super helpful. Oftentimes you want to be finding sentence patterns on your own, but if you don't have time to really watch a lot of immersion that day to kind of find patterns that you want to use, or you kind of want a new perspective, right? Because oftentimes the patterns that you choose tend to be of one category or of one kind. And if AI recommends it to you, then it can kind of be like a little refresher, right? But you can basically have it give you sentence patterns, and you can either drill these or just kind of hold on to them in your mind and notice them more in your immersion, right? So an example of a sentence pattern that AI could give you is, I wanted to blank, but I ended up blank, right? And so you could fill in these gaps yourself and really drill this pattern. Or again, you could just kind of watch content later on that day with the intention of maybe listening for how native speakers express this type of pattern, right? And of course, when it generates the pattern for you, it's generating it in your target language. I'm choosing English as an example because we can all understand it. Next up is a technique that I call domain preloading, and this is for input. And basically what you're going to do is, before you start watching a new type of content, you're just going to ask ChatGPT to give you like a list of the 20 most common words that are specific to that topic. So if you want to start watching history videos, maybe you're going to need to learn the word for emperor, shogun, different types of eras, the word for BC or something like that, right? You're going to need to learn all of those things. And so if you just have ChatGPT generate you a list and just go through and literally just once glance at the words and definitions and then watch your input. I'm talking like you don't even have to memorize these in a flashcard system. Literally just glance at it. It's going to be of a lot of help to you because you're going to really notice those words when you hear them in your immersion. And of course, noticing is the first step towards learning, right? So it actually helps you kickstart that process a lot. So I'd highly recommend this if you're going into a domain that you're not comfortable with. Next is reading input. Again, I wouldn't recommend doing like extensive, like heavy reading type stuff unless you're comfortable with your pronunciation, for reasons I've explained in previous videos. But if you want to get reading in, one of the best ways to do that is with ChatGPT, because you can basically have it like, the era of paying for graded readers is over. Like you can have ChatGPT create you a entertaining story on a subject that you care about at literally any level. You could say B2, A1, whatever it may be. You can tell it restrict it's okay, use the most common 1,500 words. However you want to set those parameters, you can totally set them and give it a specific topic, and it will make you compelling, comprehensible input. And it really doesn't get better than that in terms of generating good reading input. And a really good way I've found to use ChatGPT to practice output is to give it tell it to give you speaking prompts for whatever level you're at. So whatever kind of framework that you want to use, if you're doing like HSK, N1, N2, like for Japanese and Chinese, or if you're just using the European framework, so A1, A2, however you measure your level, like whatever scale that you use, you can have it give you speaking prompts made for one level above that, right? That's what I like to do. And so I think that I'm probably high B1 level in Vietnamese. So I'll ask it to give me B2 speaking prompts, and I'll just get the prompt and I'll just start speaking, right? And I often find that using prompts is much better than just thinking of something on the fly, because when you think of something on the fly, you tend to think of things that you already know how to talk about. But when ChatGPT gives you a prompt, you can't really mentally prepare in any type of way. You just go, and it really helps you like get good at spontaneous conversation and things like that. This is a technique I've used before, but I don't think I've used it enough, honestly. And I think I need to use this more to continue to refine and get good at really using output. And another thing I just want to say here is that you can combine and stack these techniques, right? So I can have an output session, right? And then while I'm having my output session with the prompt, I realize that there's a concept I don't know how to say. So then I ask ChatGPT how to say it in a natural way. And then when it explains to me how to say it in a natural way, there's a word that I don't understand. And then I get the conceptual definition of that word and yada, yada, yada. So stacking these techniques can lead to super powerful results. And I'm actually going to make a video on this where I'm just stacking these techniques, and you could see just how staggering the progress I'm able to make is with this type of stuff. So that's going to be a cool video that I'm going to make. Last thing, just some random stuff. There's this technique I use. I like to call it sticky words. I guess I just kind of made that up. But basically, you don't want to overuse this one. All right, use it like once every couple weeks. Tell ChatGPT to teach you like a kind of rare word that's still like every native speaker should know. That's like the prompt that I use. I say, tell me a rare word that every native speaker would know, but a learner most likely wouldn't know. and explain the definition to me in such a way that it's just ridiculous. Like, give me a ridiculous story. Tell me something crazy, right? And what it will do is it'll generate you this like really goofy, crazy prompt, and it'll define the word for you. And I find that with words like that, I just kind of remember them because it's just so like the stuff it says is usually really stupid and it helps me remember it. So that's something you could do. But if you overuse something like this, then the outlandishness of the prompts is going to get kind of lost on you because you're going to get kind of used to it, right? So use this like once a month or something like that for kind of like a free vocab increase in a way. Also, don't trust AI 100%. AI right now currently is extremely valuable and extremely accurate, but it's not 100% accurate, right? Like just the other day I was studying Chinese and I asked it a question related to Mandarin Chinese and it made a mistake, and even I caught it, and I suck at Mandarin. I've only been learning for at this point like 15 hours, and I caught a mistake that AI made, right? So another thing is TTS. Specifically for tonal languages, TTS is horrible. Like the Vietnamese AI TTS makes a ton of tone mistakes. Okay, so I'd say with the things I talked to you about today, the prompt, the conceptual definitions, the natural way to say X on the first pass through anyways, this stuff is like 99.99% accurate. Okay, I would trust all of this. But when you venture beyond this stuff and when you really try to ask it like some vague questions, I don't know, I still think it's very accurate, but you might get like a 0.1% chance of error. So always have that in the back of your mind that, you know, anything can really change and be refined by input at the end of the day. All right, that's pretty much all I've got for you. Thank you for listening.